All right, welcome to today's broadcast. Hope you're well and ready to talk about American politics as per usual. Morning, Tinkers. Nice to see you. So, the first thing I'm talking about today is the resignation of a mayor who slightly competing with my husband who's on a work call. So if you can hear him or it's too distracting, let me know. Might be distracting, isn't it? Hi, Alan. Nice to see you. Can you hear another competing voice in the background? It's fine. Okay. I'll move the microphone closer to my mouth and use a more hushed tone as well so that I don't disturb my husband. All right. So a mayor in the United States, let's check whereabouts. But they've resigned because, according to them, they don't feel safe after a mask mandate was passed. The mayor of Dodge City. Now, where is Dodge City? But there are evidently plots and threats against officials in Michigan, Houston, and Georgia, and elsewhere. So they're fueled as well by rhetoric coming from the top. Some of you may be familiar with the term stochastic terrorism, which is terrorism that's a byproduct of rhetoric that comes from the home-based terrorist who puts the rhetoric out into the world that incites violence. And they hope that it will. They don't know the time or the place for the violence to occur, but the stochastic terrorist is the person organizing this violence. And I found another term that's less pompous than stochastic terrorism, and that is scripted violence. So the person who hopes for the violence to happen writes the scripts, makes the suggestions, and then other people act out that script in the real world. Mike Pompeo also is currently being quarantined. It must be Dodge City, Kansas. Hang on, I'll bring up Periscope, Twitter. Okay. So let's have a look. Dodge City. The article is in USA Today. So we'll check. Yes, Dodge City, Kansas. In the midst of a worsening pandemic, elected leaders in a former frontier town famous for its gunfights faced a choice. They could pass a mask mandate at the urging of health experts or reject the measure blasted by some as a violation of their personal freedoms. Their personal freedom to inflict suffering and pain on others. So we've got Alan. Hello, Alan. Hello, Paul. Hello, Tinkers. Does that mean, Alan, you using a different account? Does that mean, happy birthday again for the other day, by the way. I hope you had a good day. Does that mean Twitter had a problem with you? So, yes, the violence is a product of people in power, predominantly Republicans in power, who chose to frame this pandemic afflicting America as a scam being perpetrated on the American public by scientists, doctors, people in the media. And we know that only death sometimes stops people's belief in this alternate reality. Cosmic Rose is missing. Give our regards to her. Please, we miss her too. And she will, I guess, know someone who was very active on Periscope that Periscope is closing down by the 1st of April in 2021. So I think March the 31st is going to be the last active day on Periscope, which means this broadcast has an endpoint ordained by the Twitter luminaries themselves. I'll still be able to stream live to Twitter, so I don't know if that will involve connecting with an audience in the same way, I guess I'll try it out tomorrow. And potentially I need to look for other forums to have these kind of ongoing political conversations. So I'll miss this group, but the thing is we have survived the election. And if we get up to January the 20th, we will have survived the lame duck period of Trump's presidency as well. You miss moderating. Of course you miss moderating. I will do my best. G of Berg. All right. Now, the other points that I would like to make today is probably to share with you a small amount of text from an article published in the Washington Post by a reverend whose church had a Black Lives Matter sign that was vandalized by the Proud Boys Trump supporters who rallied in Washington, D.C. So, his name is William H. Lamar IV, and he, bear with me, I just have to go into comment moderation. Do I already follow you as G of Berg? No, I don't, so that has to be separate. This is a little procedural thing. I might work on that in a second. So he's the pastor of the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington. Speaking in a vacuum, listening to only one side, won't miss that. Do you do a lot of speaking in a vacuum, listening to only one side? Because I can understand if you were attached to it, you might miss it. But if you don't do it a lot, if you don't actually give voice, give utterance to your thoughts, if you don't actually have a regular broadcast, then maybe there's not much to miss. Boston Tea Party. Yes. I know. We would let them talk, but they're so disruptive. They don't engage in exchange of ideas as much as just enjoy the transgression of misbehavior. I've worked in educational fields, and I understand that gives people joy to act out. But as an educator type person, I don't tolerate or condone it. All right. So I still need to add Alan in his new iteration. I know I might need to do it after the broadcast, Alan, because I can't find you as G of Berg. Is it under something else? I mean, that might be the second part of your name, but is there a first part of your name? All right. So back to the article. The Reverend William H. Lamar wrote, "Do you hear what I hear? I hear the imperial American myth in the throes of its own death rattle. And I hear people clamoring for a story by which to order their lives. The United States does not like to call itself an empire, but it is. Through military and economic force, the United States extends its narrative, politics and culture throughout the globe, for good and for ill. The American story to which I refer does not shape our domestic life alone. It shapes the world. Myths, stories give our lives meaning. They tell us who we were, who we are, and who we will be. The myth of the American imperium, I don't know what that word means, imperium, is deeply rooted in falsehoods and forgetfulness, in intentional historical amnesia and obfuscation. Liberty was not the founding American impulse. Genocide was. The blessing of God did not secure this nation's prosperity. The forced labor of my ancestors did. The founders were not committed to a republic or a democracy. They were committed to a racialized plutocracy led by propertied white males. These are some fair points. Everyone else was excluded by law, custom, and violence. I'll just read one more paragraph. A sign came down on Saturday, the Black Lives Matter banner in front of the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church, where I am privileged to serve as pastor, he writes, was removed and destroyed on Saturday evening. I am deeply disturbed by this incident, one of several incidents targeting houses of worship, but I am more disturbed by the continued mythology of Imperial America. This mythology supports those who commit violence against human beings for political ends, deny citizens their right to vote, denigrate sacred spaces, and claim as their own whatever they survey. It mattered not that the land was ours. It mattered not that the sign was ours. The mythology that motivated the perpetrators on Saturday night was the underbelly of the American narrative, that white men can employ violence to take what they want and do what they want, and call that criminality, justice, freedom, and liberty. So that article is the second, oh, that's your last name. Nice. So that article is the second most read article on the Washington Post today, which is good. It's good for America to review the idea, at least, that some of the fundamental dysfunction underpinning the current dysfunction as expressed by Trumpism and Trumpublicanism has its roots in a reluctance to engage with America's history and acknowledge that it's not just American positive attributes that has brought about its prosperity. There are multiple fluxes and there are multiple factors that have contributed to American prosperity, and the initial one was the ability to derive a significant profit margin from industries in which there were no labor costs per se, because the forced labor of Black Americans created such profit margins that America could accrue enough wealth to dominate other nations and to rise to the top of the pack as an economic powerhouse. And since that time, since the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, there has still been residual follow-on effects of the attitudes, the religious rationalizations, and the political rationalizations that supported slavery in the first place. Those rationalizations have persisted and have had echoes in people's actions and echoes in the actions of institutions and organizations. There has been a subsequent wave of American dynamics that has contributed to American prosperity and innovation and success, and that is the welcoming of migrants who have brought an influx of energy and flexibility and commitment to the spirit of self-betterment, which is a handy attribute to defeat entropy, which is just the natural spirit of decay and apathy and depression that often affects people who have been in the same place for a long time. Migrants are enthused with or imbued with the spirit of that better part of human nature to seek, to quest, to search for betterment and opportunity. So everybody in the United States has the opportunity to be invigorated by exposure to migrants and to that migrant spirit. Not to say all migrants are guaranteed not to commit crimes, but both documented and undocumented migrants commit crimes at a lower rate than the crime rate of people born in the United States. And that statistic has been established by careful research. So it is not disputable by logical people, only by people with a vested interest in feeding false data points into their system of confirmation bias, which underlines and supports their racist rationalizations of how the world works, which are fundamentally irrational in the face of American success as a product of American embrace of migration, which has followed on from the initial pattern of American success, which was a product of the American embrace of slavery, of enslaving people and profiting from their misery, misfortune, and lack of liberty. I Mediate would like to know what I am broadcasting post Periscope shutdown. Well, tomorrow I'll experiment with what I can do using Twitter itself and what time limits there might be on broadcasting live to Twitter. And after that, I still broadcast periodically to YouTube, and I'm broadcasting right now to both YouTube and Twitch, as well as to Periscope. Periscope has always been where my primary audience is, where my band of initial supporters is, but yes. This comment from someone who I'm sure you have very adroitly muted that says liberals are dysfunction. It's poetry in terms of its innovative use of language there to not say that liberals are dysfunctional, but liberals are dysfunction, like that we just epitomize dysfunction and exemplify dysfunction, which I'm sure is the point of a lot of people on the right who don't engage with evidence, but who engage at a level of feeling. And they feel very strongly that people on the left are communists and that people on the left are succumbing to the depression and enervation and antipathy of, not antipathy, and apathy of guilt, the guilt of acknowledging colonialist history. So every time we set an example to show that it doesn't have to be debilitating or excessively guilty, that you can, as a functional adult, approach that history and say, it's not good, but actually it's empowering to be able to say that rather than exert all that energy in pretending that slavery didn't happen or that Jim Crow didn't happen or that redlining didn't happen, that it's not still the case now that black homes consistently sell for less than homes with white previous inhabitants, so that sometimes white black homeowners will purposely hide any trace of a black family living in that abode in order to attract a higher price for an auction or for a normal real estate sale on the market. The free market is not free. It is constrained by our biases and tendencies to discriminate, and we have them. We are immersed in a society with a historical pattern of discrimination that hasn't evaporated, didn't evaporate with the Civil War, didn't evaporate with the end of Jim Crow, didn't evaporate when America caved to racists during Reconstruction and restored Southern independence and withdrew Northern troops so that the racists could commence discriminating against Black Americans in the Southern states and begin to lynch people for the audacity of exercising their right to vote, etc. Hello. Paul loves being dysfunctional. A co-worker told you liberals are mentally ill and you laughed in his face. Yes, in their mind, all young people are mentally ill, and they feed that conviction with any data point of young people suffering from mental illness. But of course, the bigger picture of any higher rates of dysfunction amongst young people is the fact that the human race is so significantly failing to address the critical challenges of our era. And so it's to be hoped that Joe Biden will be someone who can more powerfully address those problems and lead the world in doing so, because it's true that a lot of young people face depression specifically as a result of noticing that responsible adults aren't very responsible, and that generation upon generation has been failing to effectively tackle this problem, which suggests that the human race cannot meet existential crises with the rigor and conviction necessary to accomplish anything and to mitigate against the threats to human survival. So yes, hate and fear, but the narrative of the right and the Trumpublicans is premised on exaggerating and mischaracterizing the sadness of those on the left who have looked at reality closely. They misrepresent genuine sadness as being dysfunction, and they misrepresent their own confidence and happiness as integrity, when it is in fact moral cowardice to ignore climate change until it's so irrevocable that our children's futures are set in very bad stone. That is the true moral cowardice and the true pathological dysfunction that we could do well to call out, because there are psychological conditions such as hebephrenia, which is inappropriate laughter. And the people on the right who characterize liberals as being mentally ill could in turn be negatively adjudged to be mentally ill in the degree to which they pathologically ignore problems. And I think Trump's election loss, and the refusal of so many on the right to accept the evidence of the 59 lost court cases, the Supreme Court refusing to even hear the big one of the court case brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, that's highlighting the mental dysfunction of people on the right. So when they come here to call liberals mentally ill, there must be more and more people at least beginning to entertain a tiny degree of doubt. Or Mitch McConnell has begun to address Joe Biden as the president-elect. Or now we have to hate Republicans as well. We have to hate Democrats, and we have to hate and decry Republicans, and we have to keep talking about the prepper talk and the getting the beans and the can openers and the guns. So it's unlikely that many people will have an epiphany of their own psychological malaise. But some on the fringe, some people straddling both worlds, who keep pretending to themselves that Trump genuinely was victorious in the election. The people complaining bitterly at betting agencies paying out bets for Biden, but not for Trump, when the Electoral College process was finalized and even Mitch McConnell granted that Biden had won. So Paul's been cheerfully dysfunctional as a liberal for 40 years. Your neighbor sent Trump money because of his sign, "Stop the Steal." I can imagine that motivating a lot of people to give Trump money, and that money is no longer governed by campaign finance law. So Trump can just accept that, all of those millions cheerfully into his pocket. So shall I say good for them? Some people have more disposable income than usual because their daily activities have been curtailed to a degree, not just because of lockdowns, but involuntary reductions in outings. But those people who are employed in the industries which people usually indulge in, theatre going, restaurant attending, those people are suffering greatly, And they're suffering as a direct product of Republican obduracy, Republican stubbornness, that if you give people money, they'll just spend it. They won't have any incentive to work. That's a very critical Republican core belief. Don't give people things. Whereas research tends to support the opposite, with an argument to be made that giving people things without being careful about the efficacy of the giving programs, then you can create over time cultures of dependency. But giving people just money in a very pure way is associated with helping people get over difficult periods in their lives and allowing them to move to a more productive period in their lives. Thank you, Ed. I brushed my hair. That always helps, doesn't it? Maybe I just put it behind my ears differently. Thank you. All right. I saved an article, which I might read to everybody a little bit from tomorrow, which was published in March, and an admission from a former Republican strategist, Stuart Stevens, that, yes, the Republican Party had become a party of anti-science and anti-government, and that the consequences of that were made obviously manifest in the Republican response to the COVID pandemic, that there was so much denialism about the reality of the pandemic and the reality of the measures that would be needed to minimize American loss of life. Americans have quite put themselves in a box, haven't they? I mean, not Americans, Republicans, which kind of puts a lot of Americans in a box, unfortunately. What I might do is play very quickly for you some footage of the New Zealand Prime Minister, whose name is Jacinda Ardern. Oh, look, here's Ella. There's been a landmark ruling. Air pollution has been recorded as the cause of the death of this 9-year-old girl, because whilst clean air is the foundation of health, 9 out of 10 children around the world breathe toxic air. And that's not okay, is it? Something we're not often asked to think about, but it's good to start asking it of ourselves and others. So here's Jacinda Ardern. You may know her as being the very popular, globally and at a national level, Prime Minister of New Zealand.
So we knew that flattening the curve wasn't sufficient for us. The only two debates for a time were those countries that were contemplating herd immunity and those countries that were talking about squashing the curve. And originally that's what we started, because there just simply wasn't really much of a view that elimination was possible. Not too many countries were talking about that. I remember my chief science advisor bringing me a graph that showed me what flattening the curve looked like for New Zealand and where our hospital and health capacity was. And the curve wasn't sitting under that line. So we knew that flattening the curve wasn't sufficient for us.
Did you worry that it was an impossible goal?
Either you set this goal and you don't achieve it, but in the process, you certainly are reducing the number of lives lost. The alternative is to set a lesser goal, and then still misfire.
So there you go. She saw a graph. She saw a graph that if they pursued merely flattening the curve, that would still be unduly taxing on their healthcare system. So they made it their goal to pursue elimination, even though it wasn't originally a strategy with broad vocal endorsement from people. And she had the foresight and the wisdom to pursue that goal, to work through the hardship of a severe and early lockdown, and taking those measures saved so many lives. New Zealand only had 25 deaths. Let's check what the population of New Zealand is. New Zealand population. Okay. What is the population of New Zealand in 2020? 5 million. Okay, so if you extrapolate that rate of death to America's population, you would have only had 1,655 people die in the United States. And that's currently the number of, like, a little over half of the number of people who die in the United States every day. But if the rate of death in the US was equivalent to the rate of death per million of population in New Zealand, well, let's take 300,000, which is approximately the new death toll. 300,000 minus 1,655. So that would be 298,345 less people dying in the United States if the US had been able to keep the death rate in the United States similar to the death rate in New Zealand. So New Zealand might have the advantages of being an island nation, but America allegedly has the advantage of being a very wealthy nation with a powerful military, a powerful regulatory body of the CDC that's had a very high reputation worldwide. Yes, Biden will at least adopt scientific measures to try and contain the virus, but the virus has spread very broadly, and it's much bigger to put something that is very out of the box and very diffusely out of the box back in a box. Hello, Kim. All right, everybody. So I think that's all from me today. Hasn't been a long broadcast, but I hope you've still enjoyed it, and that we have it in our hearts to take pity on the people in rural areas who haven't worn masks because it has been sold to them through the various propaganda channels that they're exposed to. Rupert Murdoch outlets such as Fox News, Chris Ruddy outlets such as Newsmax, and Sinclair local media stations, and OAN. People that have sold Trump's message and the Republicans' message of anti-science, COVID denialism, that helped Trump organize a large in-person voting turnout that skewed heavily to Trump, because some of the voters against Trump did not vote in person on the day. They voted by mail, and various Republican legislatures at a state level ensured that early mail-in votes would not be counted until all of the in-person on the day of the election votes had been counted first, so that Trump could endlessly complain that all of the data suggested he was winning and it was snatched from him. Arguments that are plausible only to the most heavily self-deluded and conservative media deluded people. And now we need so much buy-in from psychologists and educators and cult deprogrammers to say, how do you stop people on the right not just from believing in a fabricated reality, but to stop them from harming other people, whether they subconsciously understand that they're disproportionately harming Black Americans who are and Hispanic Americans who are overrepresented in the ranks of essential workers, overrepresented in the ranks of home care assistants, people who help look after elderly people with complex medical needs, or other people who are overrepresented amongst the numbers of nursing home staff, or as nurses, or as other healthcare workers. Why is Trump dysfunctional? Pumpkin pie, if you want me to explain it in the last minute of my broadcast, then you're too ambitious for me. You need to begin a whole field of education that you're cut off from. And the obstacles to your understanding must be so great that it is not within my purview to overcome or dismantle those obstacles to understanding, which you have helped create yourself. You are a participant in your own distance from reality. And until you resolve like many addicts have to, until you resolve yourself to overcome those obstacles, to begin to broaden your media diet, to read outside of your narrow purview. You will not be able to understand even the beginning, the building blocks of knowledge of Trump's career as a petty money laundering criminal who has acted significantly against the interests of the American people and also the people of the world by setting a bad example for tyrants around the world that you could, for a while, achieve a significant manner of success by lying unrepentantly over and over again. So Cool Photo is of the position that you can try to forgive rural folks and teach them better. At least I'm happy to understand that not all of them are conscious of their prejudices that have contributed to their vulnerability to propaganda that was, in many cases, psychographically coordinated and targeted towards people to increase phobias and to prey upon fears and stoke divisions. Prior to the 2016 election, we know that Russian agents from the Internet Research Agency, a Kremlin organization, were purposefully pretending to be Americans organizing rallies. So they would organize both Black Lives Matter rallies in small towns and rallies opposing Black Lives Matter movement, patriot rallies. They did that to coordinate the appearance of greater division by contributing to polarizing rallies. And that's not because there's anything inherently wrong with the messaging of Black Lives Matter. The fact that that would stir up antipathy in rural America shows that there is an overly embraced history of racist justifications for slavery, for Jim Crow, for economic and environmental racism. And that denial of reality has contributed to people who want to be fed more meat, not because they hate people, because they don't want their intellectual boat to be rocked. They want the stability, the emotional stability of getting to believe what they have always believed, that it's just a matter of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, that there's no patterns of endemic discrimination in the United States, that it's only about whatever decisions you make. These people are blissfully unaware that the wealth of an average white family in the United States is approximately $171,000, and the average collected wealth of a Black family in the United States is on average $17,000. So that's a large discrepancy, and obviously average numbers do not speak for everyone. It's an average. It's numbers added up and divided by the subtotal of that population group. So there are wealthy people who exceed the $17,000 average, and there are white people who underperform that $171,000 average of accumulated wealth for white families in the United States. So an average is no guarantee of any individual's personal outcomes, but it is indicative. It is indicative of outcomes in the United States, and people that are unaware of those outcomes, that are unaware of the contributing factors to those outcomes, those are people who are addicted to falsity. They are addicted to a confected narrative that protects them from that reality. When you live off lies, your appetite is almost insatiable because you have to compete with all of the abundance of reality. You have to keep being fed Fox News data points about how a Black person may have committed a crime or an undocumented migrant has committed a crime in order to sustain your precariously balanced fake reality walking across the tightrope, across all of reality assembled underneath you. Trump is coming in at the end, good word. Yes, I didn't invent that word. It's been used in reference by researchers who looked at the outcomes of Russian attacks on American hearts and minds in 2016. psychographic micro-targeting, so finding out details about people and then coordinating shadow advertisements on Facebook to the people whose Facebook data was stolen and then used by Cambridge Analytica and its Russian partners. It's a large discrepancy, isn't it? 17,000 versus 171,000. The fact that it's a tenfold difference, tenfold reduction, is quite extraordinary. I don't know what the Russian is, but maybe before I leave, we'll put up Russian interference anti-vaccination propaganda. There's reporting on that too. It predates the 2016 election. So it was being reported on in 2018. Let's have a look. So yes, Russia is still attacking the West, and presumably one powerful reason for that is that the Russian economy is still highly dependent on the sale of fossil fuels. And when the West gets its act together, the West will do more to stop subsidizing fossil fuel industries and transfer those billions of dollars in subsidy to fossil fuel, to renewable energy sources and the technology and the distribution of that. And those renewable industries have done reasonably well on their own, but with the support of functional, sane Western government rule, that would increasingly make renewable energies a dominant player in the field of energy provision, reducing the available income for Russian oligarchs and their chief Russian fossil fuel executive, Vladimir Putin himself, who takes a share of the profit from fossil fuel oligarchs in the United States. Yes, Russia has hacked America, hacked American organizations, hacked their software. Everybody who's used the SolarWinds software apparently has to reset their password, or should at least be under advisement to reset their password, etc. Cyber attacks on security software, yes. I will be broadcasting via Twitter in March 2021. I will start trying to broadcast via Twitter potentially tomorrow, just to see what happens, to see how it works, and to see who turns up. So just to quickly have a look at this BBC article. This is a picture of a small child with measles. The BBC investigated why there's been a measles outbreak in Europe, and they've noted that social media bots and Russian trolls have been spreading disinformation about vaccines on Twitter. So remember, this story is published in 2018, so it significantly predates COVID. But troll accounts that had attempted to influence the US election had also been tweeting about vaccines, a study says. Many posted both pro and anti-vaccination messages to create false equivalency, the study found. They examined thousands of tweets sent between 2014 and 2017. Vaccination was being used by trolls and sophisticated bots as a wedge issue, said Mark Dredge from Johns Hopkins University. By playing both sides, they erode public trust in vaccination, exposing us all to the risk of infectious diseases, he said. So they played both sides, presumably to adopt the appearance of being reasonable. Maybe vaccines are good, but maybe also they're terrible, or you have two different accounts positing those contrary viewpoints, but just creating a debate that had this very unhealthy component of saying, well, your point of view and then my point of view, to create dominance of fear. Because if you say, oh no, vaccines are probably good, but then maybe they could kill your child or severely psychologically impair your child, then the fear will win. But you've still got the appearance of both sides. So to highlight that Russians have been purposefully Oh, look, he's talking in English now. Where you stand in this? You're not American? One of the sophisticated bots. Heard many people of us and a believe orange person lost. Look, I don't think your English is good enough to participate in this conversation. You might have some good attitudes. Trump turned many people to bubbers. All right, that's a fair point. I won't criticize you for that. All right, but so to see that Russia has been purposely seeking to weaken the West by purposely seeking to weaken acceptance of medical science, this critical plank of medical science that needs public compliance in order to function. To see that shows you that the West weren't just trying to get Trump in power, they're just trying to get the West to collapse in on itself. Out of mischief, because they can, because they benefit from a uncoordinated, dysfunctional society. And indeed, all of those women who began to frequent mothers groups where there were Russian bots and Russian trolls implanted to create fear of negative outcomes arising from immunization. Those women were all primed to believe rubbish about Joe Biden as well and to celebrate Trump, who was the manifestation of transgressive reactionary politics. That is to say, a politics that says, the elites, the experts are all lying to you. And I, Trump, will tell you the truth that vaccination's not that great, that windmills, far from being good for you, cause cancer, that everything the experts tell you is essentially wrong, and the only new reality you need is to blow everybody off and embrace me as the quintessential anti-politician. I'm not the elite, I'm Trump, and I'll just be rude about so many people, but positive about a nebulous you, my beloved audience, who I love. You're better than the elites. You're so great. You're with me, Trump. And you know that's the right thing to do when you adopt that position, because everybody will be against you. But you've embraced contrarianism as a valid approach to living your life and making your way through the challenges that life has to offer and the intellectual challenges of processing all of the information. It's a nice, simple story, and people cleave to simplicity when they're intimidated by complexity. So the simplicity of Trumpism is that everyone is wrong except for Trump. Everyone is out to get you except for Trump. Nice and simple. If you want to contend with complexity, if you want to have the maturity of an adult saying, let's weigh up information, you have to be able to say, well, on the balance of evidence, yes, polio was eliminated, or contained, smallpox was effectively eliminated. Measles, there weren't measles outbreaks until we had so many anti-vaxxers that the rate of vaccination compliance fell, rendering herd immunity, vaccination-derived herd immunity, not functional anymore in certain areas, particularly areas where there was low adoption of vaccinations for children. Tinkers is saying that it looks like a slim stimulus package might be passed today. That's something. I hope they haven't included too much immunity for corporations in it, because that would just be a green light for corporations to, or the people who run. I'm not going to pretend corporations are an inanimate thing. The people who run corporations and who derive very large corporate bonuses, who are very well compensated, for them to increase their margins of financial reward by putting more and more people in harm's way. Like the owners of Tyson Foods, who asked Trump to put provision in an executive order to force meat factory workers to go back to work in the height of a pandemic. And then the Tyson Food managers bet on how many cases of COVID there would be in their working population. 5 workers died. And those managers are being investigated now, and some of them, I believe, have been fired. If you're a citizen of Ukraine, why have you been commenting on my broadcast in a language that I clearly don't speak or understand? So I don't necessarily believe that you're a citizen of Ukraine, or you might be a Russian citizen, a Russian affiliated citizen of Ukraine, because it's not plausible to me that you would reply to this broadcast initially in a language that is not the language of this broadcast. So your complaints about American imperialism fall slightly flat in that, yes, we don't all endorse some of the wars that have been instigated by America, particularly in wake of the 9/11 large-scale terrorist attacks on the civilians of the United States. But nor do we decry the important role that America has played in helping keep the peace around the world, helping keep the peace certainly in Europe, helping to contain Russian aggression, and helping to maintain NATO and helping to maintain the UN. President Biden has stopped the beginning of Nazi America. Yes. I mean, I consider the last 4 years to have been incipient Nazi America, and I consider the deaths of children in US custody to be a function of that Nazism. I consider all of the deaths of people from COVID to be a function of that Nazism, because it's part of the pattern of depraved indifference to human life, knowing that that loss of life was initially and continues to disproportionately affect Black Americans. So to me, that 300,000 death toll is a product of the fascist tendencies of Trump, and also the pre-existing fascist tendencies of the Republican Party that have, on the surface, talked about patriotism and devotion and independence and service and honor and morality, but covertly have been seeking to disenfranchise Black American voters for decades, and have consistently been seeking to make it more difficult to vote and more difficult to have livable working conditions for people that are less fortunate, less backed by accumulated family wealth or intergenerational wealth, and have less ability to stand up to employers, to corporations, to institutions who seek to benefit from their disadvantage. So you saw it on Twitter, Tinkers, but it looks like it will include protections for corporations. Well, I hope that those protections will be easily undoable. Look, Pumpkin, if I could block you, I might be able to block you, because I think I've remembered that there's a way, yes, that I can put user in timeout or block user. Oh, I can do that. Let's start with timeout. Sorry, you weren't seeing all the comments from this Russian, but I was, because they were working through YouTube. Well, Mitch McConnell has now accepted the outcome, and he's asking for his fellow Republicans in the Senate to also comply. Thank you. The MAGA crowd and the Proud Boys are really pushing the BS. Yes, and I hope that their extremism helps to pair off some reasonable Americans. I don't know. The case may be that they're spreading. Trump tweeted, I know that 92% of Republicans believe the election was stolen. There's a lot of comfort thinking amongst Republicans. That's kind of the point of republicanism, to consolidate a base around the fabricated ideology that bootstraps is all you need in America, that racism does not still occur, or does not occur at a significant enough level to account for any of the life circumstances of people of color in the United States. Yes, I thought it was 126, but I might be wrong. I'll trust you for the moment, but I'll also go to bed. So thank you all so much for being part of the broadcast today, for your contributions, for your feedback. I look forward to seeing how this goes if I try to broadcast live to Twitter. I will use the hashtag DavChat, hashtag DavChat. So you can see up there, the screen, that's how I spell DavChat, DAVCHAT. So if you're trying to find my broadcast tomorrow or trying to find my Twitter account, maybe punch in that hashtag around this time and see what happens. You have Proud Boy in your city in Ontario, Canada. Yes, well, simplistic racism, delusional white supremacy is very appealing to many people, particularly people whose hurt feelings include a sense of aggrieved entitlement, and that feminism is also oppressing them. So the interaction of racism and sexism is very powerful and often produces a lot of acting out, a lot of nihilistic fascist behavior. And when I say nihilistic, it's often a component of fascism that you emotionally manipulate people and you manipulate them by describing enemies that need to be defeated until the general thrust of action and activity is just to destroy, destroy, destroy. And I think we can see some of that at work with the Proud Boys and their violence. Thank you, Alan. See you tomorrow, mate. That's so Australian. Makes me feel at home. Thank you, cool photo. I hope to see you tomorrow. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. Thanks, Engage. Thanks, Tinkerballs and Kimchi and Paul. Thank you so much, Paul. And yes, take care, everybody. Bye.